All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What is going on, everyone? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 4 preview for the Sony Open. Gonna make sure you're ready for all of your exposure today. But first off, we'll look at the weather report. We'll go through some shots gained metrics, the stone together, some lineup construction for your lineups today, and get you ready to hopefully end this week with a bang. But first off, I want to say hi to everyone in chat. We got Jay Steele down there. What's going on? We also got Steven down there as well. It says Rising Guy group, so cheers. We also got a big R Colts fan down there. We got something about Tom Kim and whatnot. Hopefully you guys are ready to get after it out here for today. But before we hop on into all the details, do want to remind you guys of how you can get access to all the tools that you see throughout this video. And that, of course, would be over there on the SHIPIT Nation. Code Luke10 will give you a discount off any membership. So if you guys like what you're seeing here, you like this data-based process, make sure to use code Luke10 at checkout for a discount off any membership. It's not just for the PGA stuff that you see here as well. We also cover a variety of different sports over there at the SHIPIT Nation, including NFL, NBA, MMA, NHL. You can see all those different sports posted on that graphic right there. And yeah, just wanted to give you guys the goods and how to get a discount off any membership over there. And of course, it helps support the channel. But let's start it off with a look at this golf course, which for round number 3 played exactly like it did for round 2. And I thought it might play a little bit easier than what we got for a scoring average. I had it closer to 1.5 strokes under par, but this 1.21 was pretty much exactly what we had for round 2. So it was about a 0.07 shot difference. If we split it by the first versus second half of tee times, you could see a distinct difference with the scoring. It was about 2 under par for the first guys out, and it was only about 0.38 under par for the last 3 groups out. Now, I have a few theories for why that could have happened. I think the early guys going out were playing with a lot less pressure, but as I mentioned on yesterday's live stream, I said that there's a chance that for an hour or two that they're playing in some lower winds, and that is exactly what ended up happening. If we take a look at the forecast from yesterday, it wasn't a massive difference, but from about 8 to 9 a.m., it says it was about 19 miles an hour sustained, but I can tell you from watching the broadcast on ESPN Plus, it was a lot closer to like 12 to 15 miles an hour. So it cranked up as the day went on. It definitely started to dry out the golf course a little bit, and I think that same kind of effect is likely going to be in play out there for round 4, but I have my doubts that it's going to be as big of a difference. This 1.8 shot difference was totally unexpected. I think a lot of it comes down to variance as well, when you only have 60-something players that made the cut, and you only have 30-some players on either side. Because if we sort this by the worst scores of the day, guys like Aaron Baddeley, guys like Vince Whaley really threw away that average, and you can see they both shot +5, but they were -3 heading into the day. So these were 2 players that were both there in the second half of tee times, even though they weren't up there towards the lead, right? They were on the opposite side of the leaderboard, teeing off last because they just hardly made the cut. So you had guys like him throw off the averages. Hell, even a Ben Coles who shot +4. Not the best day over there for your round 3 showdown. So these sort of players, I think, are why it was such a large difference over there with the scoring averages. Conditions definitely favored the first half of tee times, but I don't think it was this 1.8 shot difference like you might think right there. So when you look at the forecast for Sunday, we'll look through all 5 models here. They look flat across the board. So just like they did for the last 2 days, it doesn't look like there's a lot of, massive difference out there with these forecasts. But what you'll see when we go through them is, yesterday I mentioned that the mornings are usually a little bit calmer. None of these are calling for that. None of them were really calling for that yesterday, but usually end up getting it anyway. So what I would say about this weather, you can see throughout all these models, is calling for breezy conditions the entire day. I think if anyone's going to get an advantage, and that's a huge if, there might not be an advantage over there for your round 4 showdown, it would be the first few groups out. So if we go over here to PGA.com, let me actually bring up the PGA Tour website real quick. Forgot to bring up the tee times for you guys. We'll look through who some of those first few off are going to be. Sorry about that. It's early in the morning. Still haven't fully drank in my coffee yet, which, speaking of, we'll get another sip down and we'll show you guys these tee times as I was mentioning. So first group off in round number 4 I'm going to be that Pendrith, Lashley, Svensson group. You got Hoagie going off of hole number 10 with McCarty and Vince Norman. And you can see I would probably go down to like the first 5-6 groups that are teeing off and maybe give them a slight advantage over there in your player pool. And I'm not talking about like a 5-6 point fantasy point bump. This is more like a 1-2 fantasy point bump, or potentially just using it to break some ties. So for example, if one of your last men, you're between Matt McCarty, who's the second, well, actually one of the first groups off of hole number 10 today, and you're comparing them to somebody that's going off a little bit later. So let's look at some of the guys going off 10 towards the end of the day. So let's say you're comparing them to like a Ben Silverman. So Ben Silverman also starting very towards, the bottom end of the board. Somebody like a McCarty's towards the middle end of the board. Let's say you're trying to choose between the two. You like the leverage on both options because they're not as chalk. I'd rather go with McCarty as opposed to that guy that's starting a whole lot later if you're trying to break a tie. Now, if you just like the guy that's starting later a lot more, I don't think you have to go out there and take a Matt McCarty. But if you're 50-50, a coin flip between two players, I think that this is where the weather really comes in handy. So I think that it's a little bit misleading to think that there's going to be that massive difference in scoring once again. But you would be foolish not to at least think that's a possibility. So we've mentioned that the last few days, it has actually come true. Well, mostly yesterday it came true with that 1.8 shot difference. Even if we look at round 2, though, it was a slight advantage towards the morning guys. The first day, round number 1, it was the same kind of thing, right? About a 0.3 shot difference that was impacting those morning guys. So when things are all equal, when we have this kind of 50-50 scenario, that's what we're going to do at this golf course at Waialae Country Club. So weather-wise, it's not a massive slate to go out there and take advantage. Because they're going off in the threesomes off of holes 1 and 10, that's really the only way that you can use this weather edge. I mean, if they were going off in twosomes off of hole number 1, it'd be a completely different story with the 5-6 hours of tee times. But the fact that the first one's at 12:50, the last tee times down here at, I believe, 2:50 local time, that 2-hour spread just isn't a long enough time period to give us the kind of edge that we'd be hoping for. So hopefully that helps out with the weather, guys. I think it's a slate to not get too cute when it comes to stacking lineups. But I think where you can really incorporate that sort of thing is if you're trying to make some tough decisions towards the very end of your player pool. Now let's go through some shots gained metrics. Now's a good time for any questions you guys have, by the way. So any players want me to do a deep dive on, go ahead and throw it down in the live chat. And we're also going to go through a few players that I'm keeping an eye on for Sunday. And the thing worth noting when we get to the lineup construction for Showdown is that we've got placement points in play. So unlike rounds 2 and 3, we've got to go out there and prioritize guys finishing in the top 5. And the way I like to do it, and I'll mention this when we get to the lineup construction segment, is I went the winner and I went 2 other guys finishing in the top 5. I try and make it as simple as humanly possible for GBPs. If I'm entering a single entry, smaller field GBP, it might be a winner, 2 top 5s, and then a top 10 that I'm looking for in that sort of contest. Your last 2-3 players, though, across those kind of lineups, you're still going to have to find some differentiation, particularly if you're playing in the large field GBP. Those kind of players, those sub 5%ers, those sub 10%ers that we always are looking for round 2 and 3 Showdown, you can't just ignore those over there for Sunday. In fact, if anything, those kind of players are even more important. So we're going to deep dive the top end of the board. We're going to talk about some guys that might hold their position over here on Sunday, perhaps players you might want to consider playing in your lineups. And then on the flip side, we're going to look for some diamonds in the rough. We're going to try and find some guys that are starting further back that maybe have an earlier tee time like we just went through that can give you some leverage, try and get you different in some of those large field contests. And ultimately, that's where you're really going to win and lose the GBP, because people are going to play the winner. People are going to play that guy that's starting in the top 5 that ends up winning. Even the guys that are starting like T11, T13 that go off, everyone's going to have those guys because they're all going to be much higher round than the rest of the field. Where you're actually going to beat the rest of the field today are with those diamonds in the rough. So if there's a place to spend your time today, guys, up top, I'm a huge proponent of scattershotting a lot of the top end of the board, where you should really be getting into the nitty-gritty and trying to find that value are with those guys further down the board. And I feel like I hear people focusing at the top end of the board. They're like, who do I think is going to win? That's like all they're focusing on. Realistically, you can play a lot of the top end of the board and then scattershot towards the middle to the bottom and find some values towards the middle to bottom end of the board and have a really good slate. So we'll focus on that side probably a little bit more. Where we at? McNeely rolled out. That is for next week. So do not get confused by that. So just to show you, he has not been rolled out over here on the PGA Tour site. So until that happens, I'm assuming that he's playing. Guys withdraw all the time for the events that they're playing next week, and it's not often due to injury. A lot of times it's just because they do not want to play next week. I think he feels pretty good about the FedEx Cup points that he's going to be getting this week on top of what he got at the Century. I would not take him out of lineups. Morning said, he viewed the bonus points today to have higher value than typical. Would I target guys who appear to have less bogeys thus far? The bonus points are always important, but there's no really way to go out there and target them. Just because you haven't made a lot of bogeys the first few rounds does not necessarily mean that you're not going to make a lot of bogeys on Sunday. That's obviously a lot of times down to variance. Sometimes you have a good good week. For example, Brian Harmon, he's had a really good week at avoiding bogeys, but that doesn't necessarily make him more likely not to make bogeys tomorrow. It's just stats, right? You're going to have good runs, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think the bonus points matter, but there's not really a good way to go and target that. Early Straka might be good from 10. I agree with that, especially after a really down round where people aren't going to be high on him. He would be a low-owned leverage play, Steven, especially compared to where he's been the last few slates. So I'm right there with you. Yeah, McNeely is not out. Is there any advantage off of 1 or 10? Not that I've noticed, but I think going off of hole number, well, actually, I don't think it matters because holes 9 and holes 18 are both par 5s, and holes 1 and 10 are both pretty difficult. Now, the pin location at 10 is a little bit easier today, so there might be a slight advantage to starting on 1 just because 10 today is probably going to have like a 30% birdie rate. So you go to 9, it's a super easy hole, 10, 30% birdie rate. That means it really comes down to 8 and 2, I guess. No, sorry, 8 and 11 on whether you can have that birdie streak. Yeah, maybe slightly easier if you're starting off 1, I would say, just because of the easier pin location at 10, but it's not a massive difference. Among the top 10, is there anyone that I have the least amount of faith in? We'll let the shots gain metrics do the talking, Kep. I don't really want to give you a specific play. It's not my thing. Can you deep dive Tom Kim? You're sitting in the top 25 and you need him to bounce back. Yeah, we'll look at his stats, I guess. And then you said, do I like Pendrith or Svensson? We can look at the stats on them, but I don't really like the specific player question. So let's look at Tom Kim, and then we'll look at the stats on those two for you. So let's go through it. So first things first, let's go through our guy Tom Kim, who I bet outright this week. But yesterday, him, Sepp Straka, Ben Coles all shot like +4. So it was about the worst day possible for my outright betting card. The Steelers lost, but just put it this way. Yesterday was not a good day in the sports world for me, but hey, we still had fun with it. You're always going to have good and bad days when it comes to sports. But let's take a look at it for round number 3. Oof. He lost in all 4 categories. I mean, sometimes that's just how it goes, right? Sometimes you wake up, you don't have your best stuff with your golf game. Round number 2 was a lot better. He gained 3 strokes approach. Round number 1 was decent. He was about a neutral in all 3 categories. I would say that this stat profile is as ugly as it gets, particularly because he only had 1 good day. But this 1 good day does give us a glimmer of hope that's at least possible for him to go out there and have a low round. Round 4 showdown, this is the kind of play that you're using for some differentiation. He's going to be lower owned than a lot of the other guys towards the top end of the board. So if you're looking to get a little bit of leverage, I guess you could do it. But dude, the stat profile does not look good. I would not have that much confidence in him. And let's look at Pendrith and Svensson. Let's do that. So if we're going to go through those two, let's go with Pendrith first. So Pendrith's had a good ball striking week, at least for the most part. Yesterday, not so much. Yesterday, he actually gained putting and lost at the ball striking, but days 1 and 2 was the opposite. You can see he's into the green with the ball striking round 2. Round number 1, he gained over 2.3 strokes ball striking. The issue is that round 3, he completely threw it away. I mean, his ball striking went to shit. He was gaining putting somehow, which is just the opposite of what we'd expect from Taylor Pendrith. So I have to say that this stat profile is not my favorite. It's kind of like the Tom Kim one where it doesn't give you a lot of those markers that you're looking for in a player. Ideally, we want guys that have positive momentum with their ball striking, guys that in round 3 were into the positive off the tee and on approach. And in both cases so far, these guys that we've deep dived, they're negative on approach. And in this case with Pendrith, he's positive in a category that we're not expecting him to see him positive in. So I don't love that. Let's look at Svensson though. So Adam Svensson down here at the bottom, round 3 gained on approach. I like that, but lost with the putter. Round number 2 gained on approach. And then round number 1, he didn't have his best stuff. But I like this kind of stat profile a whole lot more than what we saw with those other players. Because round 1 didn't have his best stuff. Could have been a little bit of rust. We'll give him a pass round 1. I'm willing to do that because it was a few days ago, right? Round 2, he figured it out. He gained on approach and gained off the tee. And then yesterday, maybe not the best off the tee, but did some good stuff with his iron play. This stat profile gives me a lot more promise, a lot more optimism than the guy that completely looked like shit yesterday. Like if you fell apart with your ball striking, that's one thing. Like that's hard to turn around. If it was your putter, you can probably make it work out there for Sunday. But if it was your ball striking, your swing, that's a tough scene. Could all good. Yeah, we'll look at the top end of the board here in a second. And then any love for Justin Lauer again, been very sneaky this week. Yeah, I'm always a Justin Lauer fan because no one plays him. He's one of those guys that's just very nondescript. He's not a sexy, flashy player. So people aren't going to go out there and use him in lineups. He gained 3.4 strokes putting, though, in round number 3. So he had a good round. He would have paid off quite nicely, right, if he went out there and used him in lineups. But the stat profile isn't the kind of one that I'm looking to get behind. In fact, this is the kind of stat profile with gaining 3.5 strokes putting that you're likely to come down to earth a little bit. He's not likely to go out there and gain this 3.5 strokes putting. If he gains 1.5 strokes putting, that's still a decent day. But if he doesn't improve with the ball striking, that's not going to get it done out there in a showdown format. So he's not my favorite play for Sunday Showdown, I would say, but he's live at least. It's not the worst play, that's for sure. Let's look at the top end of the board. So before we go and find some of these diamonds in the rough that I wanted to point out to you guys, I want to take a look at the guys at the top end of the board and who has the most sustainable set of shots gained metrics. And there's really only one correct answer out there to this question, and that would be JJ Spawn. JJ Spawn, especially rounds 1 and 2, I pointed this out over on my betting preview on my channel yesterday, but JJ Spawn's having a special week, especially rounds 1 and 2. So round number 1, he gained 3.8 strokes ball striking. Round number 2, he gained 4.4 strokes ball striking. Wasn't as good yesterday. He only gained about a half a stroke there, but he gained a stroke on approach, which is the more important out of the 2 ball striking categories. And for the first time this week, it's why he went so low. He gained 2.6 strokes putting. The ball striking was okay enough yesterday. I mean, he still gained out there in those 2 categories, but days 1 and 2, I mean, he truly looked like Scotty Scheffler. So Steven Yeager too, by the way, he looked really, really good over there yesterday. You can see he gained nearly 3 strokes on approach. But if you're looking for consistency, somebody that's done it for all 3 days, JJ Spawn, it's kind of hard to talk you off of him. So he's the sort of play up top that I would argue stat-wise has the most sustainable shots gained metrics. Now, does that mean he's going to go out there and smash round 4? Absolutely not, right? Golf's a variant sport. There's a lot of variance involved with this four-letter word that we call golf. But in terms of the stats, you want guys that are dark green over here on approach, and he's gained 7 strokes on approach this week. Yeager's got a decent stat profile too. He's gaining about 5 strokes approach. The issue I have with Steven Yeager, and it's a pretty big issue, is that he's gained nearly 4 strokes putting. He's not the most consistent putter that we have out here in the PGA Tour, and it worries me that he's going to regress a little bit out here on Sunday. And Eric Cole, I don't worry about as much. He's a little bit more of a skilled, consistent putter. Patrick Fishburne losing strokes on approach this week. I think that he's maybe the biggest fade candidate of anyone that we have up top. So, Cap, I know we had the question about that. Like, this is a red flag, right? Somebody like Yeager getting a bunch of strokes putting, that's a red flag. Losing strokes on approach is an even bigger red flag over there for this week. Keegan Bradley has been about neutral on approach, gaining a bunch putting. I would say that is not an ideal stat profile. Harry Hall losing on approach and then gaining 5 strokes putting. He is a really good putter, don't get me wrong. But this kind of stat profile, it's hard to think that they're going to luck sack it for all 4 rounds. So these are the kind of players I'd be looking to stay away from, as opposed to somebody like Nico Echeverria here that's gained 3 strokes on approach. And yeah, he's still gained putting, but it looks very consistent here, right? He's gained off the tee. He's gained across all 4 categories. There's not one category, right, where he's like 5 strokes into the positive. These kind of stat profiles are absolute gold. Brian Harmon's doing it all with the short game. Normally, that would be a huge red flag, but he is a really good short game player. So kind of like an Eric Cole. I don't know if it's as big a red flag as some of these other players up here. Let's look at who else. Nick Taylor has a decent stat profile. He kind of looks like a Nico Echeverria, very balanced across the 4 categories. I would say that that's a pretty good stat profile to have heading into Sunday. Lee Hodges gaining 7 strokes putting is completely unsustainable. That's a huge red flag in my opinion. Russell Henley doing it very sustainably. He's gaining across all 4 categories. I like to see that. Mav McNeely is losing nearly 2 strokes on approach, on top of the fact that he withdrew from the event next week. Could be a little bit of a red flag heading into Sunday. And then if you look at Lucas Glover here, I guess we'll go through all the guys that are T11 or better. Lucas Glover's got a very good stat profile. He's gaining across all 4 stat categories throughout the week. Gary Woodland here, same thing, believe it or not. But the one thing that I would put out as a red flag with Gary is that gaining a bunch of strokes putting. Over 2 strokes putting is a lot for Gary Woodland. Not a terrible stat profile, though. I mean, that's getting really nitpicky if we're saying that about his putting. And then finally, Ryan Gerard down here, who he's been okay with the ball striking, gained 4 strokes out there with the putting. He's not a very good putter historically. So he's the kind of guy that I'd be raising some suspicion about some possible negative regression. But the top end of the board, it's pretty split. Like, we've got half these guys that kind of seem like they've luck-sacked it to this point in the week. And then you got half of them that kind of feel like they've done it a good way. So I don't want to give away my entire player pool, guys, but the guys that are doing it sustainably are usually going to be players that I'm playing behind out there for Sunday. Guys that are luck sacking it a little bit are usually guys that I'm taking a stand against. Does it always work? Of course not, right? Or else I'd be rich. I wouldn't be doing these videos. I'd be worth $100 million, right? If it worked every single time. But long term, those are the best plays that and what have made me money in my process is following the stats, not just blindly guessing out of a hat who's going to have a good day tomorrow. It doesn't always work out, but it's better to take an educated guess like that than to literally just pull names out of a hat. So that's what I do towards the top end of the board with my guys in the top 10, try and find the guys that I think can keep it going out there on Sunday. But as I mentioned before, that's only half the equation. You're going to have to get the winner. You're going to probably have to have at least 2 more top 5s to go out there and take down the large field GPP. But the other aspect is making sure that you have that differentiation. And the way that we're going to do that is I have a few different ways. I try and find some of these diamonds in the rough. I look at their round 3 stats. I try and find somebody that played really, really good yesterday to maybe try and see if they can carry that into Sunday. Or I just look at the whole event as a whole and try and find guys that are doing one thing well. Maybe it's making a whole bunch of birdies. Maybe it's setting a whole bunch of birdie looks up, but just not converting on them. We got to get a little bit more creative when we're finding these lower end plays, as they're not playing as well as the guys towards the top. And of course, so is McNeely in or out? He is in. So I mentioned that before, Michael. You might want to go back and listen to it. He's only quote unquote out on DraftKings right now because he left the event next week. He has not withdrawn from this event. He's in the field. You can see him with the tee time right here with Maverick McNeely. He might withdraw. I don't want to say that he's not going to withdraw from today because I guess that could happen. But all that happened, and the only reason he's down like that on DraftKings is because he withdrew from next week. It's something that has always happened. When somebody withdraws from any event in the future, they mark them as out. So in fact, we've had events where they withdraw before the event even starts, right, for the week after, and they've had them as out, and that has lowered their ownership. So there are going to be people out there, by the way, I think that Maverick McNeely is not playing today and that aren't going to use him in Showdown. So his ownership is going to be lower than it otherwise should be because of that. I can tell you that right now. That's like for damn sure. People are not going to use them as much. Let's find some of these diamonds in the rough. So I'm looking at the round 3 stats over here. That's what we've got selected on Bet the Number. And let's try and find some guys that got hot yesterday that might not actually be in contention. So Adam Svensson, I know we had the question about him before. He could be a candidate for this because he gained 2.5 strokes on approach. He's -6, so he's not going to be extremely popular. Let me check my projections, actually. I've got my projections from my Patreon that I can look at real quick. So bear with me for 1 second while I bring that up. So it's 2025 Sony Open. There we go. So Adam Svensson, I believe I had sub 5%, but I'm going to give you guys an exact number. I've got Adam Svensson on my projections at exactly 5% ownership. So if you're looking for a little bit of a low-owned flyer play, like you could do a whole lot worse than an Adam Svensson. Let me look at Meissner's ownership. So I think Meissner might be a little bit higher owned than where I have Svensson there. But if it's reasonable, he could also be somebody that we're using for some differentiation. So let's see. So Mac Meissner, I've got it 7% projected ownership. But out of the players that are towards the top end of the 6K range, he's got the second best projection of anyone in that range. And the only one that's outpacing him is somebody that's also a really good play for some differentiation. So yeah, Mac Meissner at $6,700. Like he could be another guy that we're using to get a little bit different there. If we're going down a little bit further on this board, David Lipsky had a pretty good approach day. The one thing worth noting about Lipsky is that he's had a really good week when it has come to his approach play. I played him for round 2 Showdown. He helped me cash out on what ended up being a monster day for round 2 Showdown because I had David Lipsky in my player pool. So just to check his ownership, let me see where I have him out there for tomorrow. I've got Lipsky at sub 5% ownership. So he's another kind of player that you could mix in to get a little bit different to the field and offset some of that chalk towards the top. Let's look at a few others. So Nick Dunlop, I don't have as lowly owned as some of these other players here. But a Nick Dunlop, just to give you guys an ownership number on it, he's not going to be overly popular either. I've got him at under 7% ownership, and he went out there, and as you can see on this screen, gained over 1.5 strokes on approach. In fact, almost 2 strokes on approach out there yesterday. And if it weren't for him losing 2.6 strokes off the tee, which included a shot that he hit out of bounds on hole number 10, then he would have gone even lower than his -3 rounds. So this is the sort of play that, 7% ownership isn't low, but at the same time, it's going to get you a little bit of differentiation compared to the guys that are towards the top end of the board that are 15 to 25% owned. Other thing I like to look at are maybe guys that could find some putting regression out here on Sunday. If Luke List could make any putts at all, I would feel a little bit better about him. But let's look at our guy, Frankie Sapin over here, who, by the way, I've heard a lot of really, really good things about this kid. And I've also heard that he's an absolute bad man, that he makes a shit ton of birdies, that the Spieth scorecard, the Spieth experience, where you're making birdie, bogey, double bogey, eagle out there on the scorecard is what you get with Sapin. So I kind of like this out there for Showdown. Round number 1, he gained 1.7 strokes putting, did not have his best stuff ball striking. The second day is where he found the ball striking. He also found fire out there with the putter. And then yesterday, he was pretty much negative across the board. So this isn't a great stat profile. Like if this was for a guy up top, if this was for, somebody that was chalky heading into Sunday, there is zero chance I would play him. If he was a Tom Kim, if he was a really expensive player, there is zero chance I'd be playing somebody with this stat profile. However, when you're talking about a guy who's in the 6K range, you're talking about somebody that's literally unowned heading into Sunday, I don't know if you want to completely ignore guys like Frankie Sapin that had pretty terrible day yesterday. We can't completely ignore that, but he's shown us glimpses of hope this week, where he showed us an ability to gain strokes putting. He's shown us an ability in 2 rounds to go out there and gain strokes on approach. That gives me some optimism heading into the last day. So I'm going to have some really ugly plays that I'm getting to, like a Frankie Sapin, that just to offset some of that chalk I'm taking towards the top. Let's look at a few other guys that might have a better go of it putting. Aaron Baddeley doesn't usually lose that many strokes putting, so maybe he can have a decent day of regression. Same thing with Ben Coles. Ben Coles, by the way, he was terrible across the board, so we can't really just blame his round 3 on his putter because his approach play was dog shit as well. But days 1 and 2, he gained 3 strokes approach. Day number 1, he gained 2.3 strokes out there on approach. I think that gives them some optimism heading into the final day. So kind of like Sapin, sometimes for these guys that you're taking towards the bottom end of the board, you're going to have to play somebody after a really poor moving day. But without all that pressure now that they can play a little bit more freely, you might have some of these guys go super low. So you're not going to get any placement points with somebody starting at -2 like a Sapin or a Ben Coles. But if they go out there, they shoot -4, -5, they can easily get there with just their raw scoring aspect. And it's a lot easier to do that, by the way, when you're not a 9-10K player, when you're not a stud towards the top end of the board that you're using a whole bunch of your salary on. If you're up there towards the top, you might have to have some placement points on top of just your raw score. But if you're a guy towards the bottom end of the board, you make 5-6 birdies, and that's almost a shoe-in out there to the optimal lineup, or at least a close to optimal play at that kind of price tag. Let's look at a few others. So I'm going to look at the around the green stats too. Anyone that lost a bunch around the green could be a candidate for some regression. So Sepp Straka lost nearly 2 around the green, a Tom Kim as well. So if you're looking for some studs on a bounce back, Sepp Straka could be your guy. Did not have the best approach play out there for round 3, but if you take a look at the stats for Sepp in rounds 1 and 2, just fantastic on approach. He gained 2 strokes approach round number 2. Round 1, he gained nearly 4 strokes out there with his iron play. So round 3 definitely fell off. As I mentioned, had him on an outright, just heartbreaking what he did to me out there yesterday. But round 4 Showdown, if you're looking for a lower owned pivot, he could be that sort of player. And then just to go back to the Tom Kim, because I know we had a question about it before, this stat profile, it's not ideal, right? It's terrible. But if you're going to try and get different, he's going to be lower owned because of all of that. And he lost nearly the 2 strokes around the green. It is not unfeasible at all for Tom Kim to turn it around. The unfortunate aspect is that the placement points just aren't going to be a thing because he's starting there at -3. You see any players to deep dive. Is T approach delta where we still want to be looking in round 4? It's always helpful. It's just one data point, though, to be honest with you, Dolly. I'm looking at a multitude of different things, right? I'm looking at approach stats, as you can see on the shots gained recap here, looking at around the green. We're trying to find guys that have that putting regression as well. A lot of people talk about that approach delta because it's one of the more useful data points that we have. Definitely want to look at it for sure and implement it into your process, but it shouldn't be the end all be all. We still have placement points. We still have ownership to consider, some of the other categories where we get regression as well, just like putting. So yeah, it's important, but make sure you're looking at all the other stuff too. It's all kind of a puzzle that you have to put together. It doesn't really make one sense if you look at a puzzle and it's only just one piece, right? If you're looking at 1/1000th of the puzzle, it's not really going to give you that much information. But if you put it all together, you find how they fit together, that sort of thing. It means a whole lot more. So that's what you want to do. Look at it like a puzzle, and that's just one piece of that puzzle. All right, I think that's it for the shots gained metrics, though. Hopefully it gives you guys a few guys you can look at in your process. Obviously, it's not going to be a foolproof process just looking at the stats, but it could help you make some of those decisions out there in your player pool. A good way to go through all of that is over there on the stone. I know we just had a question about the true approach delta, which this is the round 4 stone, so I cannot scroll down. I'm not going to show you guys any more than just the first few names that are on here, but the true approach delta down there gives you guys a good idea of their chances to improve on their iron play for tomorrow. You want a positive number if you're going to see that true approach delta. So just looking through the top 5 guys on here, like McIntyre, it looks like he's due for some positive regression Sunday. And then the same thing down there with the Keegan Bradley. So make sure to check out the stone if you guys haven't already. A great resource for all of that research. Hopefully I was able to mute that mic, so I didn't have to hear me hack in there. My bad. I didn't want to scroll down there. Let's go through a few other things over here with lineup construction now. So that's it with the stone. By the way, my favorite part about using the stone, using it for your research, is it just really saves you time. So you can go through, you can try and find some regression candidates on the shots gained metrics yourself, but you're going to be doing a lot of researching, right? You're going to be looking at their approach from yesterday. You're going to be looking at their approach baseline and doing a lot of comparisons. When you have a site like the SHIPIT Nation, which by the way, code Luke10 if you guys are signing up for a discount. But when you have a site like this, it does all of that work for you. So it's going to save you, 10, 20 minutes just right there per stat. And if you do that across all the different stats, right, they've got you with the putting regression, all of that sort of stuff. You want to make sure that you're saving that time. It could save you hours at a time out there per slate. So great source. I use it all the time out there with my process. And it's a part of the SHIPIT Nation tools over there on their site. And in terms of lineup construction, this is probably the most important segment of this live stream, is how to actually put together lineups here on Sunday. Because building a player pool, it's always important to do out there with Showdown. Rounds 2 and 3, it's a part of our process. But for round 4 Showdown, actually putting together your lineups is an even bigger deal. And it's already a big deal for rounds 2 and 3. Rounds 2 and 3, we got to make sure we have that differentiation, that we're going to have an ability to move up in those GPPs if our guys go out there and hit. A lot of that is true out there on Sunday, but then we got to start thinking about the winner. We got to start thinking about guys that are finishing top 5. They're trying to get those placement points, because if you're going to beat a couple thousand other entries, and this week it's only 5,000 that we're playing in the big $25 GPP. But when we get to some of these bigger events over the next few weeks, we get to our first real signature event of the year with a big full field. There's going to be like 20,000 entries over here on Sunday. And if we're going to beat 20,000 other people, let alone the 5,000 people that we have in this contest for tomorrow, you're going to have to play differently than if you're only entering against a couple hundred people. So we're going to build a few lineups together, at least 4 or 5 players in lineups, to give you a little taste for what I'm thinking about. So what I usually like to do when I'm building for Sunday is I go a little bit differently than what I do out there for rounds 2 and 3. Rounds 2 and 3, I try and take my differentiation first. I try and figure out where I'm going to get different to the field before I round out my lineup. For Sunday Showdown, though, because we have those placement points, I do it the exact opposite. I take my guys that I want to take towards the top, and then I do my differentiation afterwards. So what I'm going to do here towards the top is we're going to find 3 plays that we're flag planting that we're going to assume that finish top 5. So I'm going to take JJ Spawn. I'm going to assume that he wins. I'm going to take Echeverria as one of my potential top 3, top 5s. And then down here at T11, I'm going to throw in a Lucas Glover at $7,900. So they're all right about $8,000, which is going to do wonders out there for our salary. And now we have our 3 players that we're taking towards the top end of the board. The unfortunate part about taking guys that were all kind of cheap is that we're going to have some issues when it comes to finding a way to get different. but I have a little bit of a hack we can do to make this work. So in the hack, by the way, would be to go out there and spend really expensive towards the top end of the board. The issue we would have, by the way, if we didn't go out there and like take an 11K Hideki, is that we would have too much salary for our last 3 spots. And if we have too much salary, we're not going to have a whole bunch of guys to take it like sub 5% ownership, because at 86,666 remaining average per player, I mean, we're up here at the top end of the 8K range. And these top end of the 8K range guys, if we use our salary relatively balanced, I mean, they're like 15 to 20% out in a lot of cases. So that's why I think if you're in this kind of situation, if you like your flag plants, here towards that 8K range, you might want to consider using Hideki, who for sure might be a little bit overpriced, but it puts you down to an average of like 7,400 remaining per player. And now for our last 2 guys in, Hideki is not really going to get us different at like 20%. But now our last 2 players, we can really force our hand to try and get different down here. So just to try and find some guys down here towards the 7K range that we could use. McCarty, he could be a potential play. We're really looking for some differentiation. So I'm not going to use somebody that's towards the very top. A Tom Hoagie, a Thomas Dietrich could be in play. We already mentioned McCarty. You could look at a Keith Mitchell for this kind of lineup, a Ben Coles, a Mark Hubbard. I think just for the sake of this lineup, I'm going to take a Ben Coles. We saw the shots gained metrics on approach the first few days. I think he could be a bounce back candidate, and he's going to be sub 5% owned. So we've got one sub 5%er in this lineup. And then for our last man in, we would want to potentially leave salary on the table, but for sure we want a sub 5%er. So if you took a Svensson at sub 5%, another guy who looked really good on approach yesterday, potential bounce back candidate for Sunday, you might get away with it. The reason why I say might is because you're spending all of your salary. There is a slight chance that you're going to duplicate yourself if you spend all your salary with a decently chalky start with these first like 3-4 players. But if we went down here and we took a Sapin, leaving $100 on the table, if we left a couple $100 on the table and got a little bit more bold about it, maybe going down here with like a Chan Kim, something like that at $6,400, if you left $500 on the table, you would have no issues at all when it comes to duplicating. Like if Chan Kim was our last man in here, this would be a perfect GPP lineup. You'd have 2 sub 5%ers. You'd have your stands towards the top end of the board that you hope are going to go out there and hold on. And it's a perfectly structured showdown lineup. You've got your winner, you've got your placement points, you've got somebody like Hideki who he might have some ownership, but you're more so looking for the raw scoring out there with Hideki tomorrow. This would be a well-executed showdown lineup. And I think if you're playing in a single entry, maybe just a smaller field GPP, heck, even this week, because it's only 5,000 entries, maybe you could play Svensson like this week because there's only 5,000 people that you're playing against. But the larger the GBP that you're playing in, the more and more that we're going to have to worry about that ownership and making sure that we're different to the rest of the field. So I think that my favorite play out of all these would probably be to finish it off with a Sapin, leaving just that $100 on the table and taking a player that's got a lot of birdie or better upside. So that's just one example of a lineup that you can build. If you wanted to make some of your stands towards the top end of the board, so maybe that would be like a Henley that you played, a Keegan Bradley, just trying to make this like a different set of players that we're throwing together. If you were more aggressive about your stands towards the top and maybe used more salary on them, this kind of lineup construction, I don't necessarily think that it's better than the other lineup construction, but it is going to be a whole lot easier to go out there and differentiate because instead of having 8,600 remaining for our last 3 spots, now we only have 7,200, which it might look like an issue, might look like a downside, right? You don't have as much salary to work with, but the benefit is that we're going to have a lot of leverage here. So you can throw in like a Dunlop at 7,500. You could throw in a Svensson, 7,300. Your last man in, you could realistically use whoever the hell you wanted to. I mean, even like a Gerard, you could probably get away with there at -10. But if you played somebody like a Chan Kim, if you went down here and used like a Sam Ryder, a Hoffman, even a Jesper Svensson down there at $6,600, this type of lineup is going to be totally fine because you've got 2 sub 7%ers over there in Dunlop and Svensson. And your last man in here, even if you went with the chalkiest guy possible, which, by the way, is going to be Ryan Gerard, I believe I only have him at like 10% ownership. So just to go back and double check on that with Ryan Gerard, where's he at? I knew he's -10. It shouldn't be that hard to find Ryan on here, huh? What's his price tag? That'll probably make things a little bit easier. Ryan Gerard is $6,700. So I've got good old Ryan Gerard at only 4% ownership. So the kind of guy that I think you could use for a little bit of differentiation. And yeah, maybe not the worst idea to go out there and mix into lineups. So hopefully it gives you guys a little sense for what you're thinking about when building lineups. Really, you just want to think through it kind of like a showdown slate. Kind of like on NFL DFS where you're thinking about game script. You almost want to have like an outcome in mind for the game before you go out there and build lineups. What I mean by that, right, is if you're building like an onslaught towards one team or another over there on DFS Showdown for NFL, you want to stack that team, right? You want to take like a 4-2 or 5-1 if you think they're going to go out there and absolutely smack the other team. In this kind of case, if you look at the leaderboard, you think Eric Cole's going to go out there and just boat race the field, then you should probably play Eric Cole. So have an idea for a script ahead of time. I've even heard of people going out there and writing down a theoretical like top 5, top 10, and then going out there and building lineups for that theoretical top 5, top 10. Whatever you guys need to do to visualize what's going to happen today, then all the power to you, right? Whether that's going out there, changing up, just literally writing it out, what you think the top 5, top 10 is going to be, or if you could do that in your head, just make sure that it's a process that works for you guys and something that you can incorporate into lineups. Personally, when I'm building my 150 max and I'm using an optimizer, I do a lot of this with rules. So what I'll do is I'll make a grouping of the guys that I'm playing in my player pool that have top 5 equity, and then I'll tell my optimizer that I want at least 3 players from that set. And then I'll make another grouping that has all the guys that I think can actually win the golf tournament. And then I'll ask my optimizer to take at least 1 player from that grouping of players that can win. So by doing that with those 2 roles, I'm guaranteeing that I'm taking somebody that I think can win this golf tournament. And I'm also guaranteeing that I'm adding 2 guys on top of that that can also go out there and finish top 5, top 10. So I think you can do it with rules. I think if you're building by hand, right, writing it out like that could be a good way to go about it. Just a few different strategies to go out there and build for Sunday Showdown. Where are we at? Of course, Dolly, let me know if you have any other questions. Going to have to get used to differentiating from Jesper and Adam. Yeah, you're telling me, man. They got the same last name. They even kind of look alike. Jesper's a lot bigger than Adam. Adam's, he's a small dude. I think anyone else in the chat could probably take Adam Svensson in a fight. Jesper Svensson, though, that guy is a horse. By the way, Jesper, I think he's going to be really good. He's one of my favorite players that's new to the tour this year. And DP World Tour, he was not only a high birdie percentage guy, but he was a very consistent player over there on the DP World Tour. So could have quite a career coming up for him. But that's all I've got over there for the round 4 showdown stream, guys. Let's go out there. Let's crush our exposure out there for Sunday. Best of luck with all of your lineups out there for tomorrow. For all the betting and prop stuff for round 4, make sure to check it out over there on my YouTube page. I'll be going live a little bit later this morning with all of that. So if you guys play underdog, prize picks, pick 6, or if you're somebody that's betting strokes lines or matchups over there on the books, make sure to stop on my live stream over there on the GS Luke YouTube channel for all of that content. But for all the tools that you see over there on the SHIPIT Nation, make sure to use code Luke10 when you're signing up over there on their site. There's a link in the description of this live stream to go out there and check it out. Not only can you join the PGA section over there, which, by the way, they have a PGA only subscription. So if you're only looking for PGA stuff, they do have that accommodated for you guys there. But they also cover all these other different sports. So if you guys are fantasy fanatics like somebody like myself, you're playing MLB DFS, you're playing NFL today like somebody like myself, maybe MMA like you had out there for last night, make sure to join the SHIPIT Nation, a great resource for all of those projections. They're not going to price gouge you when it comes to the price for all of those tools either. You got great content creators like a Tyler Tambolini, also Hoop over there, Mike Petta leading the team, just great stuff over there with the SHIPIT Nation. So make sure to go ahead and join if you guys haven't already. Best of luck out there with your lineups today, and let's crush it.